Hello and welcome to the webinar. Today we're discussing proactive and reactive training. Now, we're either directing the horse or we're reacting to the horse. And it's really important that we understand this difference. And it's also really important that we are proactive as often as we can be. So let me just give you some examples of being reactive and some examples of being proactive. So the reactive rider or trainer or handler sees a behavior and they respond to it. So let's say you're leading your horse from the paddock to the stable and the horse pulls on you or pulls forward and you respond by pulling back on the horse. So if you're being proactive in the same way, you're probably going to ask the horse to walk forward with some gentle pressure on the lead rope and release that when the horse walks forward. And if you feel the horse going a bit too fast, you're going to slow the horse down by putting some pressure on the lead rope and releasing that when the horse slows down. So you can see the difference really lies in what sort of reinforcement you're using. So we're in the first case, we're actually using punishment. So the horse shows a behavior and we respond to that behavior. So we correct the horse or punish the horse for the behavior it just displayed. So the horse rushes forward. Our punishment, positive punishment, we're adding something that the horse doesn't want. Positive punishment, we respond by pulling the horse back to us. So that pressure is what the horse doesn't want. It's positive because we're adding the pressure, and it's punishment because it happens after the behavior. And the idea of this punishment or correction is to make that behavior, pulling forward, less likely to occur in the future. And that's the most important thing to remember with these, when you're looking at whether something is reinforcement or punishment. It's really whether it's designed to encourage the behavior in future or discourage the behavior in future. So exactly the same thing, putting pressure on the horse in the head collar, can have two different effects depending on whether you're being proactive or reactive. So if you're being proactive, you're going to be using that as negative reinforcement. So you're going to ask the horse to slow down with gentle pressure on the head collar. And when the horse slows down, you're going to release it. So it's negative, meaning you're taking that away. And if you're using punishment or correction, you're going to wait till the behavior's occurred, and then you're going to slow the horse down so that that doesn't happen in future. So you're trying to discourage the horse from speeding up in the future when you're leading it. So that really is as simple as that. And I think whether you're being proactive or reactive in your training is fundamental to training. I really do think it's one of those really important things. So how do we stop ourselves from being reactive, and how do we make sure that we're more proactive when we can be? I think the first thing to know is to set your training goals. So, you know, when we go out without a goal, we really are setting off on a journey without a map. We have no idea really what we want or how to get there. And that makes us much more likely to be reactive because we're really waiting for the horse to take the first step. You know, we're waiting for the horse to show a behavior, and then we're going to deal with that behavior. Might be a good behavior, and we might use, you know, positive reinforcement and reward the horse for doing that good behavior. It might be a bad behavior, in which case we're going to have to use punishment to prevent that behavior happening in the future. So actually knowing what you want the horse to do makes you much more proactive. So let's say we want to teach the horse flying changes, you know, and that's one of those things that a lot of people want to do that. You know, I put up a video, how to teach your horse flying changes. Everybody takes the video, they'll watch it. It's great. But flying change, you can't just go out and do that too. So your goal is flying changes. It's a great goal to have, hang on to that. We want to be as proactive as we can to teach flying changes. We don't want to have to use punishment. We don't want the horse to get it wrong. Because what happens if you go out and teach flying changes without the prerequisites, what usually happens with horses is they change in front and not behind. And so what that means is that we're throwing the shoulders over and the hindquarters are being ignored. And the problem is the flying change comes from the hindquarters. So we actually really need to be moving the hindquarters, not the shoulders. And so to be proactive in this case, what we need to work out are the steps to get to our goal. So we've got the goal, that's great, that's the first thing. Then we need the little steps to get there. So with flying changes, you're going to need give to the bit. You're going to need shoulder control to pivot on the hindquarters under saddle, and you're going to need hindquarter control, and you're going to need the lateral work. So all of these things will get us successfully to our goal of flying changes. If we skip any of them, let's say we skipped shoulder control, it's boring teaching a reverse arc. I don't need the horse to be able to pivot on its hindquarter. We'll just skip that and we'll skip straight to hindquarter control. Well, it leaves this big hole in your training. So when you come to teaching hindquarter control, if you don't have enough shoulder control, what the horse is going to do is going to start making mistakes. And the big mistake it's going to make is it's not going to be able to move its hindquarter independently of its shoulder. And the whole horse is going to move sideways. You're going to look like you've got side pass or half pass when you're aiming for travers or haunches in. And so that's a huge hole in your training because you're not being precise enough with the horse. What's the problem with not being precise enough with your horse? You don't know when to release, or you have no place to release, or you have to correct your horse. You have to use punishment. Punishment, correction, same thing, just, difference in our minds. It's like, negative reinforcement, we can also call pressure release because people don't like the word negative, so we call it pressure release. And punishment, is the same thing as correction. It just means trying to make a behavior less likely to occur in the future. So if we can actually help the horse by making it less likely that the horse is going to present with that behavior in the beginning, then it's a much easier lesson for the horse, and we're much less likely to have to include punishment in our training regime. So coming back to not teaching shoulder control sufficiently to get a pivot on the hindquarter when we're teaching flying changes. If we haven't done that, when we go to the travers lesson, or when we go to actually just move the hindquarters independently of the shoulders, the horse is not going to have that movement. It's not going to know that. So we're putting the horse in a situation where it's simply unable to answer the question correctly, which is going to mean it has to answer the question incorrectly, which is going to mean we have to correct it. So that is really fundamental to all of our training. So how we become more proactive with training is in knowing exactly what it is we want to teach and knowing the steps we need to take to get there. So it comes down to the big chunks, and that's the shoulder control and the hindquarter control, the lateral work. These are the big chunks. But we also have to know all the smaller chunks. And people look at it and think, oh, it takes too long. I just want to go straight to flying changes, or perhaps I bought a horse that already knows flying changes. So the horse knows this stuff. All I need to do is learn how to ride it. But it really isn't the case, is it? And we've talked about this quite a bit before about, you're having to train your own horse. The reason is because your cues are going to be slightly different from other people's cues. And this is a big thing when we're trying to be proactive with our horses. If you haven't taught your horse the lesson, then it's unfair to expect the horse to know your cues. When you start training your own horse, you build this bubble of communication, and the horse and you learn together. So as you start teaching shoulder control, for example, your horse learns exactly where your hands are and what that cue means. So you might start off by opening one hand really wide to get that step to say 3 o'clock. You might really open your right hand really wide to get that step. And as the horse learns that, you realize that you don't have to move your hand that much, and it starts to get less and less and less, to the point where you can move your hand a centimeter and get exactly the same response, the horse stepping to 3 o'clock. If somebody else has taught your horse that, your cues are going to be different from theirs. So really you have to go back and teach them again. So what happens when you buy the been there, done that, knows everything, has all the buttons, And buttons is another example of, you know, mechanomorphism. And it's just unfortunate, you know, to say that horses don't have buttons. Horses develop behavioral responses to cues that we teach them. So the way the horse behaves with me when I'm riding is going to be completely different from the way the same horse behaves when you're riding it. Simply because my cues are going to be different. And so it's really important that we, even if we get a new horse that has all of this training on it, that we don't make assumptions about what the horse knows. To be fair on the horse, we need to go back and start from the beginning. It's our journey with our horse. It's our bubble that we're building, and we need to actually build that. People look at that and say, oh, yeah, it takes too long. But it really doesn't take too long at all. And even if you've had a horse that you know has been really well started by somebody who uses similar techniques to you, it's still worth going back and starting this horse from the beginning with you. Your pressure is going to be different. It's going to be softer or harder or come from slightly different angle. Whatever you're teaching, it's going to be slightly different from what that horse has learned before. The benefit you have of the horse that's had a good training history is that you probably have a lot fewer things to untrain before you retrain. And when we get to untraining horses, so you take a horse off the track, for example, those horses have learned a lot of things that aren't very useful for us as pleasure riders. So things like they've been hugely desensitized to pressure in general, but especially rein pressure. And so we need to untrain that, and we need to resensitize those horses to pressure. Because if we don't, and if we don't set out with a really clear goal, we're likely to become very reactive in that situation. So if you can imagine, you know, you go out with your new off the track horse and you put some pressure on it to slow down your riding, and the horse goes faster, which is one of the responses they've been taught to do, to go faster to pressure, and we want them to slow down to pressure. All you're able to do really is keep increasing the pressure. So the horse goes faster and faster, and you keep punishing the horse with more and more pressure. And it's really, really reactive. So we're better off coming right back to the beginning, saying, right, I've got this horse that's off the track. I know that it doesn't understand stop or slow. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach the horse how to slow down or how to stop. And you go out there really in a very proactive way. You know what it is you want to teach. You have the method to teach that, and you go and install that. So let's take the stop with the race horse. All right. So we need the horse to be responsive to pressure. We need the horse to start to look for answers in behavior, in movement. The thing about race horses often is that they've been pushed around. There's been a lot of muscling through. They start them very young, and they're easy to push into the barrier. They drag them around on the mouth. They're very desensitized to all sorts of things, but especially pressure cues. And if you look at them being led around the saddling paddock, the thoroughbreds, for example, quite often they're just being jerked in the mouth for no reason whatsoever, just bang, 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 bang on the mouth. So, we get these horses and, we put a little bit of pressure on them and they just ignore it. So we need to be really proactive in this situation, say, right, what do I want the horse to be able to do? What's my main aim? Your main aim with these horses is to teach them how to learn again. Because when you're muscled through things, when you just push through things, you actually can disengage your brain. You don't need to use your brain. You push you into the barrier and you just run as fast as you can around the track. You're not really actually engaging the horse's brain at all. And for us, because we want the horse to be safe and happy and all of those nice things, we need the horse to think. We really do need the horse to think. So what we first want the horse to do is to understand pressure release, to understand negative reinforcement. And that's where we are really, really proactive. It's no good with these horses to be reactive, because a horse that's been desensitized to this amount of pressure and hasn't been involved in the learning process, hasn't engaged its brain, is always going to outmuscle us. So what we need to do is engage the horse's brain, and we can do that by being proactive. So the first thing to teach the horse is that you're going to feel a pressure, and it might be rein pressure, it might be head collar pressure, it might be touch it on the side, it might be whip pressure, it might be voice pressure. All of these things are pressure. And the big thing about being proactive is knowing when you're going to release that pressure. And we see it a lot, don't we? You know, people riding around on horses or lunging horses, and they're in trot, and you can see them clucking at the horse. They're like the whole time, or kicking the horse. So, the horse is already in trot and the person's kicking the horse. It's disengaging the horse's brain, basically, is what it's doing, because you're constantly cueing the horse. So you're desensitizing it to whatever pressure you're using, your voice pressure or your leg pressure. You're desensitizing the horse. So we want to do the opposite. We want to be proactive, and we want to engage the horse's brain. We want to sensitize the horse to pressure. So with an off-the-track horse, you might need quite a lot of pressure to start with. So as long as you're aware that we're always aiming for self-carriage in whatever we do, we're always aiming for self-carriage, then once you start working out what the spot on the horse is that you want to move, what direction you want it to go, what you're using to motivate the horse, what is the pressure, and at what point do you release that pressure? And that's the important thing that we often forget. And when you're desensitizing horses by clucking to them all the time, or by having a constant feel on their mouth, then that point, that final point, it is the most important point, but it's also the one that's almost always forgotten. And we talk a lot about pressure release. And we focus too much on the pressure and not enough on the release. But we have to know exactly, to be proactive about this, we have to know exactly when that release comes. So let's take our off-the-track horse, and we want to teach the horse to stop. So we'll be on the ground, and we'll look at one foot. If we're standing on the left-hand side of the horse, let's look at its left front foot. The cue, so the spot on the horse we want to move is the left front foot. The direction we want it to go is just not forward. So it could swivel around perhaps, but just not walk forward. The motivator is going to be rein pressure, and the reward is going to be to release the pressure and praise the horse, right? So if we're really precise about that reward, and we just watch that one foot, rather than watching all the other feet, because what's going to happen is the horse is probably going to disengage its hind quarter. It's not going to stop all its feet together. We're only talking to one foot. Then we can release exactly when that foot stops going forward, and the horse is then going to engage its brain. Once the horse starts to engage its brain and think about connecting that, the reward, the release of the pressure and the reward with the cue that we gave, which was rein pressure, the horse anticipates that. If our pattern is good and our release is timely, the horse begins to anticipate that and stop sooner and sooner and sooner. So that's why I always put a verbal cue first. So I say, whoa, and then I stop walking, and then I pick up pressure on the bit. So I have these three cues, and you can see the horse thinking about this, and pretty quickly the horse is stopping when I stop walking. And then the horse is stopping when I say, whoa. And at the beginning, the horse will disengage its hindquarters quite a lot. And when the horse connects the fact that I'm talking only to one foot, that's the only, it doesn't disengage anymore, because that's a lot more work than the horse needs. And so it just stops walking forward. And the beauty of a simple lesson like that is it really starts to teach a horse, like an off-the-track horse, how to learn again. They've forgotten, they've been pushed through everything, they haven't been involved in the process. So by being really proactive and really understanding what it is we're trying to achieve every time we go out to achieve something, then it makes it very clear for the horse, and the horse starts to engage with learning really well. And we start to really build that bubble of communication, which is so wonderful, because once the horse starts to engage with us like that, the sky's the limit. We can teach anything. And so coming back to our flying change example, so once we have the shoulder control and the hindquarter control, the horse knows how to move the whole horse sideways in the lateral work, Really, the only thing the flying change is then, if we can put all those things together, is moving the hindquarter independently. So I always use my favorite exercise for hindquarter control is the half pass exercise, where you come up the long side, you do a half 10-meter circle, and then you half pass back to the track, and then flying change there. And really the only movement that you're interested in is moving, let's say you half circle round to the right. The only thing you're interested in is being able to move the hindquarters to the left, to be able to engage the left hindquarters, all you're doing. Because if the horse changes behind, it'll change in front, unless it's seriously lame. But it's very easy for a horse just to change in front and not behind, but the change comes from behind. So if we have all those other things in place, then all we're addressing is moving one foot. So all we're addressing is the left hind, and the direction we want that to go is further forward underneath the horse. And that's all we're doing. And we can reward on that because we have everything else in place. So that way we can be really clear. It's very easy to be proactive when you can be clear, when you know exactly what it is you want. If you take the same exercise and say, oh yeah, I want the horse to do a flying change, and you circle around and you throw the horse over on the shoulders, then you're likely to get a disunited canter. The horse is unlikely to change clean. And you're then going to have to become reactive, because you're going to have to correct the horse for that. There are ways of doing that, and certainly if you're teaching flying changes, even with the best preparation in the world, you are still going to have to correct your horse from time to time. And I'm not saying don't correct your horse or you can't correct your horse. I'm just saying be aware of when you are correcting your horse and when you're using negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement, because it's a very, very different deal. We know that horses don't learn so well from punishment. We know that. They do learn from punishment, but they don't learn as well as they do from reinforcement. And so that's worth knowing. So if you're in a situation where you find yourself using punishment or correction, if you're in a situation where you're trying to prevent a behavior from happening in the future, you're using correction or punishment, try and rethink that situation. Right? Say, okay, how can I be proactive in this situation so that I don't have to correct the horse? Let's take an example of a horse bucking. Say your horse bucks every time it goes into canter, it bucks. This is not uncommon. Yeah? Why is the horse bucking? So you have to step back and say, okay, why is the horse bucking? How could I set up a better pattern for the horse? So obviously the horse has learned a pattern. It's learned to buck when it goes into canter. So how can I set this horse up for success? By being proactive, by teaching it something new and teach a new pattern to replace that old behavior. And it's quite simple, really. I mean, the thing about bucking when you go into canter is it's quite hard to buck. It takes a lot of energy to buck anyway, but it's even harder if you're traveling in a nice soft frame. It really is. So the first thing I would do would be to teach the horse to travel in a nice soft frame. The next thing I would do would be to do that on the long reins and practice transitions with the horse, maintaining posture throughout the transitions up and down, and just practice that until the horse had the new pattern set. I have a voice cue on that. So I always kiss the horse into canter. So the horse is trotting on the long reins. I give a kiss cue for canter like that, and the horse goes into canter, and I can reinforce that on the long reins much more easily than I can under saddle. So I get that consistent before I ride the horse. It's much easier for the horse to learn these things on the long reins than it is under saddle. So get it consistent before you ride. Then when you ride, the horse has already made that mental connection between the kiss sound and the canter. So a big reason horses kick when they go into canter or buck when they go into canter is leg. It's rider leg. And, they have to use a lot of leg. Perhaps the horse is they think the horse is lazy. Well, really, the horse is not lazy. The horse just doesn't understand the canter cue. So teach it on the ground where the horse has the opportunity to do that without having to worry about any rider cues at all. And you'll set up a new pattern. And horses, you know, they are great pattern learners. So the more patterns that we can set up for the horse, the easier training and learning is going to be for that horse. So I encourage you to be as proactive as you can, turn every situation around to say, okay, if the horse is doing something I don't want it to do, what's the new pattern I could set up? How could I change this situation without having to correct the horse? And if you really think about what you're doing with the horse, you'll find there are a lot of situations that you've gone through and you repeatedly corrected something. The horse turns and pins its ears when you're girthing it up. The horse doesn't stand still, you know, doesn't stand untied to be saddled. There are all sorts of little things where you'll find, if you really think about it, gosh, you know, I've been correcting that for years now. Let's turn that around and say, okay, I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to be as proactive as I can. I've found this thing that I've been using correction or punishment with. I'm going to turn that around and I'm going to set up a much better pattern for my horse so that I don't have to do that. I'm going to be proactive. So the horse that moves around when you're tacking it up. We had someone in the training the other day who was so pleased, never really thought about it, but now her horse just stands there without being tied up or anything while she tacks it up. And it's such a big step forward because not only is it safer and more convenient if your horse will stand there, but it's really bubble building. You know, it really shows that you're in this bubble with your horse, you're communicating with the horse. And you can see that as well, the strength of that bubble. And when the owner sent me a video actually of them tacking up the horse, and she'd walk off and she'd get the saddle cloth and she'd come back with the saddle cloth and she'd walk off and she'd get the saddle. And then the last thing, and the horse stood there the whole time, stood still, there was grass, it was standing on grass, it wasn't even grazing, it was just standing still and was watching her go and come back, and it was absolutely fine. And then when she went to turn the camera off, she walked further away and you could just see the bubble burst. It was great. It was a great bit of video because, you know, the bubble's getting bigger and bigger and she's stretched it like this. She can go, I don't know, 4 or 5 meters to get the saddle cloth and come back, and the horse is still fine. But as soon as she went 10 meters away, the bubble just went pop and the horse just looked up and wandered off to its friends. And it was really, really interesting because that's something it's really worth being aware of, you know, and when you are proactive, when you're really conscious of what you're teaching your horse to do, that bubble not only gets stronger, but it gets bigger as well. And you can, you know, your horse is still engaged with you even when you're not standing very close to it. And so that's something really fun to play with and really nice to actually watch. Really nice to watch the change in the horse, and the confidence that the horse gets from that as well is great. So basically the moral of today's little story is be as proactive as you can. And the way to be proactive is to have a plan. So be really aware of what it is your horse is doing or not doing, and be aware of how you can fix it. Know how you can change the situation. Find a better pattern to set up for the horse. And I also think, you know, it's worth noting now that actually being conscious of what the horse is not doing makes it much easier to be proactive. And what I mean by that is it's easy to see the horses bucking. It's easy to see the horses pulling on the lead when you're leading it. What's the horse not doing? Because that you can address. If you have to address what the horse is doing, then you have to correct the horse. But if you can think about and concentrate on what the horse isn't doing, then you can actually sort out a plan and set up something that will help, set up a pattern that will help the horse do what you want it to do. So the horse that's pulling on the lead is not leading nicely. The horse is not leading in self-carriage. The horse is not maintaining its space from you. So that's what you need to do. You can address that. You can be really proactive about that. You can teach the horse to lead properly. And the same thing, you know, if the horse is pulling on the reins when you're riding, if the horse is pulling on the reins, you know, rather than reacting to the horse pulling on the reins, you can teach the horse softness. You can teach the horse give to the bit. You can teach the horse self-carriage. So focus on what the horse is not doing, and then you'll find your answer. Then you'll find the way back to finding a pattern that will help the horse behave in the way you want it to behave. that is it from me for today. I'm going to turn the recording off, but I'm going to stay here and answer questions. So if you have a question, hang about for a minute.